Greetings, YouTube. As I've mentioned in the past, I work in a factory that makes auto parts. We make seals for engines and such. And while we're making them last night, I was thinking about the fact that if I wanted to make one of these gaskets, what is entailed in producing it? And if, for example, the machines were all shut down and the building were abandoned for a period of time, what would it take to get them up and running once again? The reason I was thinking about this is that you always see like a post-apocalyptic setting, and at some point, or almost always, there's a group or even multiple groups that are trying to rebuild the world, start things up again, get the industrial infrastructure functioning. And I don't think I've ever really seen any game or even fictional work, book, graphic novel, film, what have you, that really understands the depths that you have to go to achieve that. So, for example, imagine for a moment that you want to get a gasket built. Now, the cars of the world would function quite nicely for a while. You could scavenge parts from other cars to keep some going. You would be able to get parts from parts distributors. You'd be able to get parts from the manufacturing plants and parts from the manufacturing plants that make the parts, at least for a while. But eventually, they're all going to run out. And if you want to keep all those vehicles running, you're going to have to make components for those cars. If you make them one at a time, they're going to be hideously expensive and really difficult to acquire, and that's not a recipe for an industrial base. That's a recipe for rich people having certain things that poor people don't. So if you want to have the industrial base getting back up and running, what would you need? Now, the presses I run, I would say that after a 4-day shutdown, there's a really good chance that those presses aren't going to run when we come in and fire them up on a Sunday night. Because that's frequently what happens after a 4-day shutdown, like, say, at Thanksgiving. As many as half of the presses in the building won't function. And that's only been down for 4 days. So after a year or so, you'd be looking at having to get them overhauled. And since the supply chain is gone, and we don't keep a lot of parts on hand, you'd have to scavenge parts from other presses. So let's say you have 4 presses, and you have to scavenge parts from 3 of them to get 1 press running. Okay, so now you're down to 25% of your potential production volume, but you've got a functioning press. So now you want to make an all-rubber gasket, which is the simplest kind of gasket to make because it only has one component, silicone rubber. Where do you get the silicone rubber from? Well, fortunately for you, in my state, we have a plant in the state that produces silicone rubber. But it needs components to do that. Where do you get those components? In fact, last month or a month and a half ago, a fire in a factory in Germany pretty much shut down the auto industry in America because they produced a key chemical that we all needed to make a certain type of rubber so that we could then make seals for cars. And without that factory, and without that chemical, we couldn't do it. We were rationing this rubber like you would not believe. We were making like exactly the number of parts we needed and then moving the rubber to another press so that press could make the exact number of parts we needed and praying that we would have enough to last until they could start producing it again, which they have. So let's be optimistic and say you've got the rubber components in the U.S. and you can get them to the place that makes the rubber. You make the rubber, you bring the rubber to the factory. You've got the electricity and the water you need to make the press run. Remember, the press has got hundreds of moving parts: electrical, hydraulic, pneumatic, electromechanical, electronic, and unfortunately for you, they're Windows-based. So even if you succeed at all of these things, do you have the people to run the parts? Do you have people who can figure out how to make them so they function? Know how to produce them for the right amount of time, the cure time they have to run at. Know how to take them out of the mold to get them so that they don't break. Now, yes, you're going to have a learning curve if you try to do that from scratch, but it's going to be steep and it's going to be very frustrating. But after a few months, even if you were starting from scratch, you might be able to do it if everything else I have mentioned is still functioning. And if you have to use metal components, well, that's even worse. Aluminum components last for about a month after they've been treated chemically before they have to be treated again before we can use them. Steel components, their treatment's only good for about 3 days. After that, you have to treat them again, and you can only treat any of these components, metal or aluminum, once after the initial treatment before they're ruined. So, do you have them? Now, what I'm trying to explain here is that the critical path for the production of any type of industrial product is long and complex, and at any point along that path, something breaks down or fails to be achieved, the whole thing stops. And the further up that chain you go, the more catastrophic it is when something fails. Yes, that's a cat. But I've never seen a game that handled that kind of detail, that kind of resource management before, and I'm not sure how many GMs or players would want to handle it. Maybe there are people out there that would. I'm not one of them. But I think it would be interesting simply because it would generate a lot of fetch quests. It's going to be a whole lot of work for a bunch of teams to go out in the world and find key components you're going to need. Now, the further into the future that the catastrophes happen, the end of the world ends, just as a cat clawing me, the better chances are that the machines will be able to adapt more easily to things because they'll be more complex and more able to adapt to things than the machines we have now, which are very much single-purpose built. So I have a question for anyone out there. Have you ever dealt with trying to reestablish the industrial base in a post-apocalyptic setting? And if you have, how much success did you have? And how much detail did you go into? Did you really worry about supply chains and making sure you had all the components you needed to get something made that you needed to make something else, which was critical? I'd be interested in knowing, and hopefully, by the time I film the next video, Mandarin will stop trying to claw me.